Good morning.
Very cool. My new walk-on music, as you suggest here.
Well done, Joe.
Trying out my low FM voice on the microphone. Good morning, guys. How you doing?
So we got the data whisperer here this morning, Scott Taylor. What's up?
How you doing? Nice to
Doing
see
good,
everybody.
man.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, anytime. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. Cool. For probably the two people in the world who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure, as long as it's not you two. I'm assuming it's you.
Actually, well, yeah.
Scott Taylor, Data Whisperer, 20-something, almost 30 years in the data management part of the space. So a lot of what I know you guys focus on, a lot of the conversations I have with people are about where data ends up, like data science, BI, analytics. I'm focused more on where data starts, over in the data management, master data, reference data, metadata, data governance, data stewardship, all that foundational stuff you do earlier on in the process that makes everything else better along the line, no matter what. So
that's awesome. Well, thanks for keeping it real on the front lines of data.
Sure.
Yeah. So I mean, So our audience is a lot of data engineers, analysts, data scientists. I think, when we talk about things like master data or data governance or any of these things, it seems like there's a potential that we're talking about two different things. I.e., you're talking about one thing, we're thinking it's something else. When you say master data, like what does that mean?
Master data very clearly defined. When you think about a business, it's the nouns of your business. So it's the data about your relationships and your brands are the two high-level domains, super domains, you might think of it that way. But relationships, customer, vendor, partner, prospect, brands, products, services, offerings, the things you make, the people you buy from and sell to and partner with, the data you have, that foundational, highly structured, well-managed data you've got about those types of entities is master data. I lump it in with all those foundational data types like master data, reference data, metadata. For me, that's all part of the same bucket. Those are all the things that people use, the piece parts of a lot of other data activity. My view is master data and those kinds of data are the most important data any organization has, because almost all the rest of the data you have is about those things. Your customers, your brands, your relationships, all that kind of stuff. So that's where I kind of see it. Feature engineering, right? You guys do feature engineering with, right? So features, what are the features about? They're about the instances, right?
Yeah.
So I'm the instance guy, you're the feature guy, right? It's like attributes are about entities, columns are about the rows. So that's where I think, there's a lot of intersection in those.
Yes.
You need both, but most of the conversations around data are about the columns, the attributes, the indicators, the propensity to whose propensity? Well, your customer's propensity. Okay, then that's my part, right? That's the part I focus on. Does that help?
It does. And I think of master data management as being about, say, your customers when they're signed in. In other words, they sign into their bank or they go to the ATM or they create an account, and then you have a very clear identity tied to that. But actually, that identity gets really tricky. I have a friend who works in the banking space in master data management. Lots of little regional banks that work together. It's like, how do you tell when two people are the same customer? I think from our perspective, what gets really tricky in working in online retail, this is something we ran into a lot. You would have situations where customers were signed in, and so you would have a pretty good idea of their identity. But then you would also have them like shopping across 5 different devices. And then the question was, well, now how do you try to determine who they are if they come over here and they sign in and they buy something, but then they're also shopping on their phone and they're not signed in, or they might check out as guest once in a while. From your perspective, are there things that master data management can bring to that conversation beyond these conversations about fuzzy matching, trying to probabilistically determine who someone is across these different devices?
Fuzzy matching is just a technique to help master that data. So I think MDM and master data brings a lot to the party in terms of making sure that foundational data that customer entity is valid, has the right structure, might have a unique identifier, might be able to identify it across all those different platforms. Those are all techniques and hows. I stick with the why. I'm more the why than the how. But that example you're talking about is a very good use case for why you need to have a master data, an MDM program and strong data governance, because you got somebody logging in 5 different devices, 5 different ways on your retail site, and you think they're 5 different people, then you're in for a lot of problems. You're sending promotional incentives to one version of that person because you think they're about to churn, and meanwhile they're a big customer because you have another piece of data that says, okay, here's all their transactional history, just a sort of a generic example. But the need for MDM and the need for master data is pretty well articulated by that kind of circumstance where we just have all these, we can't uniquely identify our relationships. And people, enterprises have to have that. They must have a way to uniquely identify and structure and govern their relationship data, master data. So it fuels all those other activities.
Interesting. Yeah, it's refreshing to hear you talk about fuzzy matching in that way, because I think there are certain partisans of MDM and partisans of data science who are kind of like, no, MDM can't. We don't do fuzzy matching. We don't worry about that.
If that I don't have a dog in that fight. It's like, why bother? All right, match however you do need to match.
Yeah.
Okay, in a lot of cases, you need to connect. Call it what you wish, but I've got one version of something. I got another version of something. I believe mine. I think this other one has something that might have value. I got to connect those together, whether it's, probabilistic, deterministic, whatever kind of philosophy you want to approach it with. Doesn't matter to me. Just get it done. So again, I stick with, how do you explain this to a CEO who clearly doesn't want to hear anything about fuzzy anything? Mm-hmm. You got to get to the business benefits really, really fast.
How do you articulate that to executives? Because I think, in your book as well, you kind of hit on this word. You got to tell your data story in a lot of ways, right? But yeah, hold up a copy if you have.
Yeah, where's my unprepared here back in the datatorium. I'm not in my studio setup as usual. Right?
That's awesome. But I think you have some good guidance for how people can articulate these things. You want to go through that real quick? I found it really refreshing as well to how you just your approach to this. It was buzzword free and very clear. So
I try. The cover of my book says 99% buzzword free. I didn't want to overpromise, so I kept it at that level. I urge people to focus on ways that whatever they're doing in data, and in my case, managing data, help enable the strategic intentions of the enterprise. Where's your company going? And why is what you're doing with data going to help your company get there? I divide it up in a kind of pithy technique I call the 3 V's of data storytelling. A little play on the 3 V's of big data, obviously, but my 3 are vocabulary, voice, and vision. So you want to establish an accessible vocabulary. The words you use are really important. We had some back channel conversations during your last episode around some of the wording, and I tend to pick on people who use words that I just feel either don't make sense or misleading or a little bit too created for the sake of creating new terminology. I can't stand that. So you want to use clear, concise business language. You want to harmonize that story and that approach to a common voice. And harmony doesn't mean everybody sings the same notes, but it means they sound good together. So does your whole team understand this? Can they articulate it? If you bump into the CFO in the cafeteria and they're going to ask you, why are you doing this work? Not in a threatening way, but they just want to understand it. Can they all do that pitch? It's a pitch. And then the final V, vision. How does all that stuff you're doing enable the vision of your company? So I always start with that part. If you're looking for reasons why you should do data, read your annual report, listen to what your CEO says, watch your investor day presentation. those are the initiative. That's the focus of the company. Data can help it everywhere. We're all going with this premise of like, guess what? All of you out there listening who work with data, you're right. Okay. Data will help your company, whether you're in the data science side or data management side. We all get that. We all know that. There's so much struggle and frustration to communicate that. But if anybody's looking for extra validation, yes, we are all correct. Data helps companies. Data, companies that use data better are better companies and perform better. There's a ton of research on that. There's a long way between that idea and getting it done.
Right.
Part of that journey is getting the support for it. And that's kind of the ballpark I tend to play in. How do you get stakeholder support? How do you get, fans for what you're doing, especially in data management where I live? Not quite as sexy as what you guys do.
Not
A lot of
nearly.
sizzle. It's inherently dull. I get it. That's why I sort of over rotate on the, whatever you want to call it, entertainment value or passion or energy, because it's so vital to everything any company does that's based on, you can even bring it to a higher level, not just based on data, based on technology. If you use technology in your company, hardware, software, data, if you have data, you need data management. Shortest version of the story I could tell.
Well, speaking of the sexy stuff, I mean, as we started writing our book and researching it, I think one of the conclusions we ultimately came to was that a lot of the technology problems are solved now. And I don't mean by that there are no improvements in data systems, that they're not going to get faster and better. It's rather that for the most part, if you're a data engineering team, you can use off-the-shelf stuff and get the job done. But increasingly, as we kind of go into this post-Hadoop era, cloud data warehouses, it's time to shift focus into the higher levels of abstraction, especially things like data management, where I feel like tech companies 10 years ago were just completely ignoring data management. It's all about Hadoop or GFS or whatever the latest technology was. And now it's like, okay, we have those foundations in place. Now, what are we doing with the data? How are we making sure that it's correct? How are we making sure that it's consistent? How are we making sure that we're not getting anomalies creeping into the data from the outside world?
Yeah, because you hit on the sexy parts. I mean, I think data management or master data was as sexy as like a chastity belt for a long time.
I'm not touching that one, Joe.
I'm not touching that one either, man.
Leaving
But
that
you know
one
what I'm
alone.
saying? It was like that. I think that was a perception. It's like we're not going anywhere near that. So.
Yeah. But I mean, I kind of smile Riley again, the guest you had last week, and this is something I've heard a couple of times. So I kind of, again, kind of smirk at it in the background. He mentioned, oh, well, data quality is really a big thing now. Really, really noticing that a lot. And even your comment, Matt, 10 years ago, guess what? It's always been there. There was data management before there was analytics, right? People were counting stuff. Okay.
Right.
Chart of accounts. That's where master data came from. In my historical view, came from finance. You always had a list of customers. You always had some sort of list of products. It began to grow. It got more complicated. You got more data on top of it. But I mean, master data has been around since before, electricity, since before computers, since, people had lists of things and tried to figure out what they meant. I talk a lot about, hence my hat, right? Truth, determining that truth in data before you derive meaning. That's the only way to go. And so some of the latest sort of buzz and hum in the space about, wow, gee, this new thing, or I've heard a lot about data quality. It's like, it's always been there, man. I don't know there's been a disconnect. I'm not laying blame anywhere. There's clearly been a disconnect for a long time between data in general and the business, data versus technology, data, determining the truth in data management before, versus deriving meaning out of business intelligence and all its iterations. So I just kind of, part of what I think my place is in the space is to help highlight that and draw those connections and be a constant reminder of, hey, get the data right and everything else is going to be better. Simple as that. Simple to say, hard to do, but still.
Yeah, it's very hard to do. Edward Mitchell asks, why is it that non-accountants are so nonchalant about data quality?
That would make accountants chalant about it if I solved for X. I don't. Are they? I mean, I think account, it comes from finance, but there's plenty of people in marketing, plenty of people. I don't think they're nonchalant. The lack of chalantness that push this terminology, I think, happens somewhat in the data science community that continues
Yes.
to be okay with statements like 80% of our time is munging and wrangling data.
Yeah.
Why is that okay? Why aren't enough people pissed off about that? Why? Because if I was anything and I spent 80% of my time doing something that wasn't what I said I was, then what am I?
Well, in most cases, we think that those people are data engineers. But I mean, Matt and I joke about this. We call ourselves recovering data scientists for that reason. We spend all our time building these systems. But I think to your point, though, the underlying thing is the data even right? So I think to kind of push on Edward's question a bit too, there's a thing, when you're doing accounting, things have to balance, right? You have the balance sheet, for example, that has to balance out. Same with income statements and so forth. So I think that's a forcing function where like your accounting entries when you close your books, they have to match. And if they don't match, well, they won't. You're not going to be able to close your books. So I think
Right.
that acts as a forcing function for your data in the sense where you have to make sure your transactions are right. Because you can't do your job otherwise. And so I need to ask, if the audience, if anyone has an accounting background, do they teach data quality in accounting school? I don't know. My wife went to accounting school, but I don't know that if I asked her about data quality, I would wager to guess that she does not know anything about that term. But I would wager to guess that she knows how to balance books, right? So I think she
Right.
implicitly knows data quality. I mean, I spent some time balancing our books recently or going through it, and I noticed data quality issues, and I was like, okay. I think with accounting, it's just such an immediate thing where you either get it right or you don't. There's not really a gray area at all, unless you're, Enron or something. But that's a different story. So,
Right, which was that was a different story.
yeah.
But I'm sure that there's somewhere around the quality of numbers, around trusting what you do, around gap standards, all these other things are ways to ensure that the information you're looking at, the data you've got, is correct and you can trust it, and it's some version of the truth. And that, I don't know where that isn't relevant. It seems to be everywhere. And so we come back to that. The more you can come back to that, I bet Andrew Ng, right, a great data science leader, and he wrote recently about becoming more data centric than model centric, right? It was like, bang, that was another sort of version of my, oh, wow, they're talking about data quality. Here's a brand new thing. But, that aside, there's a very well-respected leader in your part of the space going, you know what, you should spend more time on the data than fixing your model, because if the data is better, then the model's going to work better and you're going to get better results. It continues to be, I can't find a different story. I just try and find different ways to tell it, but it's always the same.
Well, I know Matt and I can attest to that. I mean, building models or reports off of, especially data with lots of duplicates in it or misspellings. I mean, this always happens. And so, that's just a tip of the iceberg. I mean, kind of bring it back though. Let's talk about master data. Because you mentioned earlier that there's the process and the idea, and then there's also the how, right? And you're more focused on the former, the what and the why. Walk us through those distinctions. I think that there's a subtle point that a lot of people miss, because to bring it also back to your comments about this proliferation of sort of the rediscovery, so to speak, of data management. It seems what I'm noticing is people are really focusing on the tools and not necessarily about the how and the why. That's not articulated. My sense is if this continues, though, people are going to run into there's a real danger that people will mistake the how, the tools part for the practice. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts
it's
on that?
constant. Yeah. I mean, it is. MDM is a practice area, according to Gartner. It's an approach to manage and govern your data in a structured way that includes unique identifiers and hierarchies and taxonomies. That structural piece. It's also a category of packaged software, right? MDM systems. I talk more master data than MDM only because I feel like it's, it's a tangible output of that process. So if you have great master data, you must have done some MDM. Doesn't just show up out of anywhere. And so it's, I try and look at that kind of data, especially drafting on a lot of the common kind of approaches or ways people talk about in the space. Data is an asset. Okay, then this is an asset. And data has value. Fine, then this has value. And actually, then I, rant about how it's the most valuable data because it's the data that everything else you're doing is about one way or the other. But really kind of focusing on that. And part of what I'm urging the communities to do in my own way is try and come together. So when you were talking about munging and, dealing with data, Joe, that's got duplicates, one thing that MDM does for an organization is disambiguate these entities. That's part of their job. That's part of their scope, is to make sure you've got fewer duplicates. You have consistent spelling to set a data standard for an organization. So if there are data scientists out there spending, 120% of their time munging and wrangling, you're not going to get rid of all of it. But go meet the data management team in your organization. Go find out if you've got MDM going on and talk to those data practitioners who are doing that part of the work and see if you can't get that data. That's the data that's running the business. PS. So if you want to operationalize the work you're doing, it needs to be integratable. It needs to be standardized. It needs to be linked to and hopefully sourced from this core truth that's already being done in an organization, instead of making up stuff because you didn't know it was there. Let's figure out a new way to group our competitive set, or here's a different definition of a geography, or here's a categorization structure that I found on Google that might work when it's got no relevance to your business. If the standard's there, you got to go to the standard first. That's the discipline I hope that, more and more people adhere to. And so I think that'll get rid of, can we stamp out munging in our lifetime? I don't know. Not all of it, but some of it.
I know, Matt, I would like to see that disappear. So
it just feels like just too much. Just feels like too much. Kurt Bourne, I think, had this line about how 80% is munging and wrangling and 20% is complaining about your munging and wrangling. So again, it's just, give him credit for that, Joe.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But it's still too much. It's still, that's not value added work. And if you just give that all to a data engineer, is that person doing something that's really not connected to the
Well, I mean, I think what it does is passes the buck.
Yeah.
It doesn't solve the initial problem. I mean, even in smaller companies, we see there's actually quite a few with small companies where you're dealing with it's, and I want to get your take on this too in a second about when would you want to start doing data management and governance. But we see, it seems like a lot of the practices that we see start really early, where either you're going to have rigor around your data, or you're just going to, in typical startup mode, just, focus on making money and we'll deal with the after effects later. I think that tends to be kind of the default. What do you see, Matt?
I mean, you can't blame that default. I mean, if people are spending, if they're starting, I've worked with all different sizes of companies, and some of, I don't think there's a louder proponent of master data out there than me. I'm happy to challenge anybody, if somebody else is screaming as loud as I, then join me, right? Let's get going. But I think there's a level at which it doesn't make as much practical strategic sense. And so I focus really on enterprise. If you're an enterprise, we can define what that lower end is, but that means you've got enterprise systems. It means you've got more than just Salesforce, right? You might have Salesforce and SAP and Oracle and, or whatever you name the flavor of whatever enterprise system you've got. You're in a number of regions, you've got X number of employees, you've got X size of business. Things start to get in a way that you need data to help manage your business, which is one thing that data does. That's when you've got to start to really get serious about it. But a startup, two people in a garage trying to come up with the latest, greatest thing, focus on making sure that thing works. You have a business. Who cares if your customer master's right if you don't have any customers, right? So there's some balance, just as you would with other things in your organization. When do you start an HR department? When do you really have a finance person? When do you really have a structure of, your sales activity and marketing? All those things are part of growing up as a company, and MDM is part of becoming a mature company. And that's the point. So I just kind of lightly draw the line at the enterprise level rather than trying to be militant about everybody's data always has to be mastered no matter how big you are. I mean, I don't have MDM. I'm a small consultancy. I got a handful of
Are you
clients.
sure?
Yeah. I have it in my heart. Like I look and go, okay, I'd like all these things spelled the same way. I'd like that's to align nicely, but it's not like I've got a whole, data steward team here because I don't have enough activity. It's about activity. You got to try and keep it in shape. So
I think in the startup space, when I was talking about 10 years ago, yeah, Joe and I are coming from a very particular perspective. And then we've sort of come around to your way of thinking where there are a lot of these ideas that can cross over all the way from enterprises to startups. And I think, when big data started to come out, when Hadoop came on the scene, everyone was like, this is a magical tool. You just dump your data into a data lake and you can do amazing things. And all the way from startups up to enterprises, a lot of these projects failed, and there were all kinds of reasons for that. But one of those reasons was no data consistency. And I think even for a startup, okay, let's not be militant about master data management, but let's at least talk about data consistency, and let's at least talk about having data pipelines so that everyone is seeing the same data rather than people working on their laptops, doing their own munging. 2 or 3 different data scientists do things 3 different ways. And then you deploy your model, and the identities you have are not consistent with the identities used by the website. So the model doesn't work very well. Like, I think you can start talking about data consistency and some of these other practices pretty early, even if you don't have a dedicated MDM practice. And even if you're not militant about saying, this is exactly what MDM is, you can make sure that those 3 data scientists are collaborative, that their data lives in a common environment, that they're not all replicating the same work over and over and over again, which is what tends to happen.
All right, you convinced me, Matt. Everybody needs MDM. I find it.
Even Scott Taylor, he's going to go set up Talent right now. Yeah. So, we got a question here from Mike Nash. He asks, so Mike, with the sheer volume of data increasing, do you think we will have to look at new ways of processing data, reduce munging and wrangling, i.e. AI, let the tech sweat, not us?
The more standardized the data can be, I think the better experience we're going to have. The current trend, which I love to watch increase about data sharing, is going to require that data becomes more standardized, in my view. So while there's a lot more data increasing, it's always, there's more data now than ever before. There's more data now than there was when I started saying there's more data now than ever before. Everybody loves to brag about those numbers. The more standardized it can get, as close to the source as possible, the better it's going to be. And that's very similar, I think, the intention of what Andrew Ng was talking about too. It's like, get the stuff right first if you can. So setting those standards early on, big data, when that came out and I was watching that, it's like, what is that really? And, volume's one thing, velocity's another thing, but it's the variety that kills you. Mm-hmm. I worked at Nielsen. Nielsen had a ton of data. Okay. Getting scanner data from thousands of supermarkets across hundreds of thousands of products long before there was an internet, but it was standardized, right? In huge volume, daily data, all kinds of different disparate sources. They spent a lot of their time harmonizing that, standardized, because of the variety of sources. It wasn't about the volume, it wasn't about the velocity of it as much as it was just simply dealing with the variety. How do we standardize that? How do we harmonize that? How do we structure that in a common way that it can be integratable and drive interoperability, which is, again, inherent in what a lot of companies want some form of. How do I connect to other things in a seamless fashion so we can scale? That's what scale is, right? It's part of what drives scale is interoperability through technology, hardware, software, also the data. Just because your 2 machines talk to each other doesn't mean they understand each other. So it's mm-hmm. At that data layer, let's not forget that data layer. So rambling around a little bit here.
Yeah, but these are some interesting points. So, I mean, Matt and I've been talking and writing about this, especially echoing your thoughts on data sharing. as this becomes more of a thing, like that, I think it presents a lot of great opportunities and might also present like some insane threats. So if there's no vetting of the data, for example, that's awesome.
You got to start with, a big first thing is the structure. Okay. Do I even know what I'm looking at? Do all these rows align with my rows? I talked about rows and columns before. Really easy to add columns, really tough to align the rows. That's the data management part, is aligning the rows to, at the risk of oversimplifying it. I always get back to this rows and columns idea and go, all right, take two spreadsheets, bang them together. How easy is it?
Yeah,
two different spellings, different names, Coca-Cola, Coke. Is that the same thing? At a brand level, pick a topic, pick an area. You're gonna see these examples.
Any thoughts on? I mean, Mike mentions AI here. I mean, any thoughts on, master data for unstructured data? So we're talking just text, images, audio, video, that kind of thing. Have you given any thought to that?
I mean, still, to make that stuff valuable, people talk about putting tags on them.
Mm-hmm.
Tag is a form of structured data. Part of what makes big data big is its lack of structure. Adding structure. Somehow I listen to these folks all the time, and we've got this new fangled thing, and I just listen for it. At this point, I've been doing it long enough that I just wait for somebody to say some sort of version of tag, identifier, metadata.
Yeah.
Bingo. It's like metadata. Okay. Next. Oh, we got this data mesh and blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. What really, really makes it work? Well, it's got this metadata layer. Okay. Bing. Next, come on in and somebody else tell me that you don't need to manage data to make this stuff work. It's just using different names for it. So it's it's always in there. I mean, stuff doesn't work without it. Without these, identifiers and identifiers, hierarchies, taxonomies, and geographies. I roll those up into what I call the 4 C's of master data. So for your audience out there who's still not familiar with the space, very simple way to think about it. You need a code, you need a company or some form of hierarchy. You need a category or some way to know what kind of thing it is. And you need, just because they all start with C, you need a country or some form of geography. And you have that on your data. You know where something is, you know what it is, you know who owns it, and you know it's unique.
Mm-hmm.
And all kinds of data problems go away when you have just that 4. That's it. Just 4. Somebody's got a 5th. I'd love to hear it. Value. Well, value is not a piece of structure. Okay. So it's that basic stuff. Everybody's got an ID. The problem is everybody's got an ID and they all have different IDs, and these IDs don't map to each other. And there's no common language for everything everywhere that everybody agrees on. Everybody does want to see things one way, their way. We got to deal with that. But the language idea, that's a good way to explain it to your leaders who don't want to get technical. We need a common language. We all got to speak. We all got to get on the same page. We all got to have a common understanding. We all got to have a version of the truth, whatever you want to call it. These are really basic, simple business premises that people agree to once they start to hear it put that way.
Right. Like it would be very odd if an executive was like, I don't think we need that.
Yeah, I don't think we need a standard. No, exactly. Yeah.
Get out of my office with this stupid idea.
And I'm trying to help the folks I work with and for and rant to get the funding, get the support, get the money. We all work in most of us work in business, and most of us are trying to help the business we're working for. And you can't just do that by wishing it. You got to get support. You got to get a team. You got to get fun. You got to buy technology. Fine. You got to get that engagement, which is the premise of my book. A way to do that, and part of a way to do that that's mandatory is you got to tell that story. Mm-hmm. That's my version of data storytelling for data management.
Right.
How to get people to understand the strategic value of governing your data properly.
It always comes down to sales, doesn't it?
So it does.
I'm 4th generation sales, so I go back to that. Yeah, it's you gotta pitch. You gotta convince somebody the benefits of what you have to offer. I mean, how many times have you guys gone into a room and somebody just goes, "I have no idea what you're talking about." What?
Yeah.
Why are you even here? I've had senior leaders say to me, why are you telling me this? That's what they interrupt with. They don't interrupt with like, well, how are you going to get it done? They interrupt with, why? Who let this guy on my agenda? The answer isn't, well, we're going to use R and Python and the technique. The answer is not the technique you are going to use. It's the strategic rationale about why it helps that person do the job they want to do. And it's not a trick. It's not like, oh, always compliment them and always make it think it's their idea. And always, no, it's real. You're in business. You're trying to help, the company make quota, increase sales, reduce churn, improve brand equity, whatever those initiatives are. Data will help every single one of them. The beauty of things like master data, if you have it, it can actually help. It can help grow your business. It can help improve your business. It can help protect your business all at the same time, sometimes with the same record. Okay. Tell me another part of the organization that can make that sort of claim. I don't know, so finance can help, manage and improve and protect. It's not out there to grow the business. Sales is out there to grow the business. They don't do a lot of mitigating risk. Feel like, the data department, if there was one, could go head to head with any other part of the organization and go, I can help this company in a lot of ways. But we struggle. So there's so much. I know I'm going on and on here, but all you got to do is go through LinkedIn and there's all this bickering. I mean, I posted something because I do it, just to try and rev things up. Master data is the most important data. And somebody's like, what about metadata? What about reference data? It's like, I'm on your side, man. If you want to split those hairs, we're not getting anywhere. So I pick what I think is the coolest sounding one and the one's actually the most, tangible in my mind, and go for it and say it's all, call it structured data, call it data foundation, call it a data standard, call whatever you want. But it's that, it's that piece of it that you got to get done. We're all on the same side here. So.
And even coming back to Mike's question real quick before we go on, I think he's right. Like there are these great data wrangling tools now, like Trifacta and such. But if you're not using them in a consistent way across the company, then you're not going to get great results. I mean, they can point out when you have weird categorical deviations or something, but if you don't have a standard process for saying, these are our data categories, let's map them, those tools will not help you.
Honor has a question here. What's up, Honor?
Hey,
it's just, hey, Scott. So what's the tipping point for data consistency and quality? How do businesses recognize that they've gotten there?
That's a great question, Honor. You start to not being bothered by the data. You're not having these inconsistencies. You're not arguing. You're not going in a room and you've got a report that's got 9 and somebody else has 12 across the table and you're arguing about the difference of the 3. And before you know it, the meeting's over. You've got these seamless customer experiences. You're seeing things happen at scale. These are sort of indicators of it. I look for it in the actions and that a company is able to take. You've got a confident sales force that can walk into a prospect knowing they've got a comprehensive view of what that prospect's needs are, and then can go and have a real serious business-oriented conversation with a perspective that the other side of the table understands and agrees with. That's a symbolic representation of having great data. If you do that at scale, you got one person who's like, does all their homework all the time, that doesn't count. But scale is a factor for sure on whether a business is there or not. Can they make those sales on the website? Are they able to target effectively? Do the return rates, are they reduced? Are you mitigating risk where you're not providing credit to bad actors? And it can get really ugly after a while if you're, there's all kinds of headlines that are based on people having bad data. So when those things don't happen, and that's part you've hit on kind of the core of sort of the hard part. Like, how do you know it's working? Well, then when nobody notices, that's kind of a hard thing to identify. I guess it's why I've spent my career literally trying to help explain this, because it's not apparent. It's and it takes over and over and over again to try and sort of get that point across.
It's interesting. I mean, I think it's like a lot of things in data, though, maybe with the exception of, reporting and analytics, but if you're doing your job, nobody actually knows. So it's kind of like a good plumber. Like, I don't want to have to call my plumber every week about problems.
Yeah. Oh, excellent example.
So
yeah, exactly. How do you know you got good plumbing? You don't have any plumbing problems. There's no leaks. There's no, that's a great way to think about it. And the water's okay to drink.
right.
Right? So
and actually, I think that hits on a good point. I was thinking about some analogies, and I figured it was actually, water treatment is very similar to master data in the sense where, like, you can have the best pipes in the world too, but if you're living in Flint, Michigan with bad water, it doesn't help you, right?
yeah, water's a good example.
Yeah.
Food is one of my
Food,
favorite
yep.
categories to
Food's a
talk
good one.
about. Food's a good. It's like, you can't know, Julia Child never said it doesn't matter what ingredients you have, just make sure you know the technique. That's not how people cook, right? There's always that input, output part of it. I think a lot about the evolution of data and data management and data quality, similar to the evolution of like entertainment and music distribution. So one part of that analogy is just, I used to have LPs, and then I had cassette tapes, and then I had finally got CDs, and then I got which is the first time I actually saw music as data, right? When you rip the CD and then you put it on an MP3, and now I can just yell across the room to my favorite virtual assistant, and they'll play whatever I want. Still the same music. The music had to be good, right? So if you were part of that group that helped people transform the way music was delivered and distributed, you probably didn't have much to do with whether that song was any good, right? So there's kind of a couple parties involved here. When we were talking last week, and it was mentioning about, data quality, data observability, which I'm learning. Yes, you got to make sure your data gets there okay. There's no pipelines that are broken. But if that's the same as sort of like turning on your TV and making sure the picture's good, making sure the quality of the transmission over the cable is correct and consistent, that doesn't have anything to do with whether that TV show entertains you or not.
Right.
So I'm sort of on that part of the creative spectrum, if this analogy is making sense. Somebody had to write that show. Did they have characters? Does the plot work? Is it a comedy? Is it a drama? Those are categorizations early on. All those things happen in what I consider sort of the data management, data governance part of it. That's what I mean by data governance, right? Is this a good show versus whether it got to my TV or not, if that example works at all.
I think it works really well. Honor has a follow-up question here, actually. Let me just put this. What about tipping point and self-assessment of when a business needs to implement governance?
You just look at your file. I mean, why it gets some outside help. I worked at Dun & Bradstreet. I worked at Nielsen. Both of the services that I represented there took people's internal data and gave them a sense of how, I won't even say how good it was. It was how terrible it was, because everybody's data sucked that we took a look at in some way, shape, or form. And once you start looking at that data, you can't hide from it. The selling stops. So very simple. If it's something like a customer master, do you have duplicates? Do you have consistent hierarchies? Do you have consistent categorization? Again, back to my 4 C's again. Do you have the unique identifier reduces duplicates? A company gives you the hierarchy. A category gives you the genre or the trade channel, or however you're sorting the thing. And then you need some form of geography. So just looking for that basic stuff. Are there these multiple versions of is there this dissonance across your organization because sales is looking at customer through Salesforce and operations is looking at it through SAP, and those things don't even align? They don't always have to be exactly the same, because you're going to ship something to a different place or a different interaction than you might sell it. The commercial relationship versus the operational relationship versus the financial relationship. Those could be very different parts of a big entity, but they've all got to align somehow. You got to roll them up. You got to disambiguate. They need to be part of the same common structure. So you're just looking at and it's what we used to do. We used to look at people's data, and it was a blast because we had this process. I ran a sales force at Nielsen, and I said, okay, part of our informal process is we got to tell somebody their baby's ugly. That's what you got to do. You got to show them, like, look, you got problems. We're here to help you. And what was beautiful because I always worked on the supplier side. So it was, I had to sell this stuff and market it and get people to understand it. You kind of had them either way, because it's very rarely do you actually call on somebody or talk to a company whose job it is to keep their data straight. So either it's terrible, and you got a million examples, and I got a lot of fun stories about kind of doing that baby's ugly process with folks, or it's actually good to even great, at which point you question the effort they're putting into it that isn't value add to their company. That's not what you do. It's like, I know it's still out there, but there was a time, back in the day, people used to write their own enterprise systems, right? They'll write their own software. We've got a software department writing our own, financial package, our ERP package, our CRM. It's like, why? You make beverages. What are you doing in the software business? So same thing with syndicated data. I'm a big fan of external syndicated data sources. There's more and more coming. They're inherent in data sharing. But those companies, by their very nature, have to create really standardized, integratable, market coverage level data that people can depend on. And there's a lot of value in that, rather than trying to create your own standard whole cloth. So get some help. It's a good way to figure it out.
Actually, coming back to Ed, he's got another question here.
It's a long one.
It's a long one. I'll just kind of point out the key parts here. When there are 5+ analytic or export points, all pulling from different points of the data pipeline, how do you start the MDM process? And he gives some examples of kind of how he had some misfortune in this area.
Row level. Yeah, it's row level, baby. That's where the problems are. Okay. At one company, I was tasked to explain the differences, but no one seemed to want to eliminate the differences. You start to get into, and again, I'm not a how guy, so I'm going to like punt on some of the techniques, but that certainly starts to touch on the cultural aspect of trying to set a standard in an organization. And you can get these clashes. Look, we always have to see it this way. Like I said, my way, that way could work. A big one that comes up a lot is kind of local versus global. So you're a big organization, you've got all these local entities. They all have to use stuff based on their, local geography, but you got to have a consistent way to roll that up globally. So, the leaders can get a sense of the entire business without everything having an asterisk next to it. That takes this cultural effort of part of reinforcing the need for a standard, and everybody's got to give a little bit. People just want, the preference is, I just want to keep doing it my way. That's fine. You want to change everything else? Go ahead, but I'm going to keep mine because, XYZ. So a lot of my book is focused on getting C-level support, because if you want to change the nature of an organization or change, that kind of behavior, you got to have support from the top. Doesn't happen otherwise, no matter how convincing you are, because there are people in the organization who, even if they believe you, even if they agree with you, they're not going to change their behavior because they take that direction from someone else. And you can't blame them for that. It's like, this is a great idea. Why don't you do it? Because that's not what they're saying we should do.
Right.
So having that higher level and go as high as you can to get support for an overall data management program is really critical in terms of the success of any of that implementation.
Yeah, I think Matt and I always are fond of quoting Charlie Munger in this area. It's like, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. So if you're dealing with teams that have no incentive to make a change, then that's your outcome, right? So I think alignment's super critical.
I mean, look at all the businesses that everybody's envious of, or they all talk about all the time, right? So, off the top of Uber, Airbnb, Amazon, Facebook, Google, all these people have really highly structured data. Okay. I haven't been inside Amazon, but great example. If you go to any product page on Amazon, they have their own unique identifier called an ASIN, the Amazon single item number. I think that's what it stands for. I would venture to say their whole ability to target and provide different options to you and it's all built off of that structure. They had to create their own because the UPC, right, the Universal Product Code that's on packaged goods isn't big enough. The scope, they're one of the few organizations that their scope of what they do is so large, they had to create their own language. If you put a product in Walmart, they use UPC. So it's,
Right.
it's different kind of scope, but it's all built on that, right? Netflix serves up all this content because it's really highly structured. They've got those micro genres that are able to identify the different attributes and characteristics of different movies so they can serve that up to you. That doesn't happen because somebody's, they've got a concierge in the background. Oh, they like this kind of show. Let's show it. No, that's all data driven. That's all off a highly structured, well-governed, expertly stewarded data behind the scenes. So if you want to do that kind of stuff, and all those folks can do it at incredible scale, dominant, right? Market dominating scale. Structured data, master data, reference data, metadata is a big piece of that play.
I think the really surprising thing about Netflix in particular is if you read their data engineering blogs, they're very proud of the fact that their data scientists can be extremely independent. In other words, they support a huge number of data systems. Whatever you want to use within reason, they're going to support. They build all these systems, and yet somehow they're able to maintain consistency so that there's a common set of categories of shows. Not every data scientist is creating their own categories of shows. They may be working in a different system with Presto or with some old version of Hadoop or Spark, but they all have that consistent data. And maybe that's, at the end of the day, tearing down silos is one of the major challenges in this whole area. If you have a central MDM team, but everything is siloed, you're not going to be very successful, I would think.
You got 30 cooks on one of those cooking shows. They all have the ingredients from the same place.
Yeah.
So they're not going out to their own store and buying their own ingredients. It's work, right? They've standardized that. So similar analogy-ish probably of like, you got all these data, go do it. And, some of them bake great stuff and some of them do terrible stuff, but that's their technique. That's their own, they can't blame the ingredients. So, but it takes a lot, it takes a lot of rigor to enforce that. But the benefits of it are just astronomical.
What have you seen in this area? Because companies like your Netflixes, Google's, Amazon. I mean, they did in a lot of ways start data first. Because they're digital first, and so they didn't have a lot of the baggage that you'd have as a kind of an older company trying to figure out data. I mean, how have you seen? Is that something you've seen as well, where maybe data first companies have an easier time with master data than?
I think they do on the product side. So I have been to some of those companies I listed. I have talked to them when representing some of those other companies I worked for, and they've got a lot of, other data problems. If your product if the service you produce is based somehow on highly structured data, then you have to have that right. I don't confuse that with, do they have all their own, suppliers that service their company completely aligned? No. And, everybody's trying to figure out, is this company a new company that I should call on or a different one that I already know, and all that kind of stuff. So, so there's challenges everywhere across everybody's data, but the ones that are really, and I agree, if you're digital first, digital means data. I mean, how else do you do it? Right? you can't get off the ground unless you've got the right data structured to get out. You can do it for two people, and who wants that? So it's just, it may be so inherent in that process that it's not called out just, discreetly, but it's absolutely in there. Otherwise, how would Uber be able to get a car to me and wherever I am if they don't have great location data and know the drivers and know the distance, and know the rates and all, how would they do it? They couldn't do it, right? It's, my cab company could do that, but where are they these days? Terrible experience and, overpriced and just all the rest of it.
Oh, they're using apps now too, which is kind of funny.
I don't know.
They
cab,
but no, but I mean, but it's interesting because I think these digital first, data first companies really push the issue, and then the incumbents are like, either we keep up or we're out. So
yeah, and that pressure, I think, these digital first companies are they benefit from literally not having that legacy. I look at, one analogy, mobile payments in Africa is much better penetrated than in the US. Why? Because, because we had decades of other ways to pay for stuff at scale, and you got to pull out of that, and not everybody can change over that. So if you're starting at a level where there's better technology and better data already, then you're going to be able to get that's why they call it a legacy. Right.
On that note, too, I'll never forget this time I was in rural Cambodia, of all places, like one of the poorest places in the world. And the cell phone signal was stronger there than it was at my place in the United States. And I noticed that everyone was playing on their smartphones, playing live games. Right. So I think, kind of a fun aside, but it's like, wow, it pays to kind of leapfrog sometimes.
Yeah, a lot of Asia didn't have good landline service. Like I was in the Philippines for a couple of years, and you couldn't. The landlines were controlled by the government, and it was almost impossible to get one. You had to be on a waiting list for a few years. So everyone just jumped into cell phones in the '90s, basically. Same kind of thing.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, coming up on time, Scott, it's always fun talking to you, man. So,
always great. No, thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. We can reconnect. I mean, it again, as Matt and I were pointing out, this is a critical topic that we're starting to see more and more of, especially in the the data startup space. I think you and I kind of had some back channel too, kind of like splitting hairs. And I said, oh yeah, some of the company we work with a lot of data companies. Like, what do you mean by that? They provide data, or they provide the kind of the infrastructure for to look at data and so forth. I think that was actually an interesting distinction.
Yeah, and it's back to that. Do you produce the show, or do you distribute the show? Right? Do you cook the food, or do you just provide the tools to cook the food? There's some distinctions there that I think are important to focus. There's a lot of companies. There's a lot of software companies with the word data in their name, and I look at them. They help you manage data. They help you distribute data. They help you share data. They help you master data. But they don't have any data.
Right.
They don't. Doesn't come.
It's not like Nielsen or something.
So and that's what I look at. So whether it's it's somebody who creates the content, that's what I consider a data company in terms of producing that content. And they need systems too, and so on. But that's kind of the distinction similar to when we talk about data management being the movement of it or the creation of it. Which one is it? It's both, but if you're having a conversation with somebody, you got to know which one it is. Because if you're talking about, producing the data, and they're talking about moving and, distributing it, you're not having the same conversation.
No, that's I think is what the conversation you and I had a few days ago. Is he dense or something? Like, what is his problem? So, you're probably sitting there like, he's kind of dumb, actually.
No, we're just part of what I do is just try and gently, sort of segment this stuff and clarify it where I can. That's
why we love you, man. That's awesome. Well, for people who want to find out more about you and your book and Meta, how would they do that?
Graham, website, metametaconsulting.com. Find me on LinkedIn, the Data with Scott Taylor, the Data Whisperer. I got a YouTube channel that's got all my videos on it too, whether it's serious, sober kinds of webinars or whether it's puppets and cartoons. They're all talking about the same thing. It's always the same message. Better data is better, but I pride myself at my range. I can do white papers, but I can do puppet shows too. So guess which one gets more engagement?
Definitely the serious white papers, I'm sure.
Yeah. Seriously. It's much more fun to play with puppets.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So it's there, and I'm always out there trying to help people tell a better story. That's literally it. Meta is the name of my company. No, we're not changing it to Facebook. It's about what it's about. So we talk about how people talk about data. There's room for that in the space. I've proven
Big time.
I'm doing, I'm having a ball and keeping the lights on doing this for the last couple of years, just focus exclusively on that. But
that's
if
awesome.
I can help you tell a better data story, that's why I'm here.
Well, these sessions are great because we can stop talking past each other. Like Joe was saying, there's a lot of inconsistent terminology. You've been in the space for a long time. We'd love to get to know the enterprise terminology a lot better.
Sure.
Yeah,
always happy to help.
Yeah, and I would say, on that note too, you helped us a lot, and just the book that we're writing.
Yes.
I mean, I when you mentioned the DM block book, I just went out and bought it the next day and read it. I was like,
Oh, wow.
okay,
Cool.
this is
Great.
cool, like super helpful. Maybe not the most great reading book in the world, but I felt like it covered a lot of topics that we were missing.
Oh,
We
super.
realize like data management undercuts all of data engineering, and many other disciplines, but that's what we're focusing on for this book. So
It's the foundation. I always draw it on the bottom. I don't put it on the side or the top or the
Mhm.
middle. It's always it's the foundation, right? You got lots of silos, you need a foundation. You got lots of verticals, you need a horizontal. You got lots of columns, you need a row. Same
Yep.
story.
Awesome. Thanks to the audience out there. Lots of great participation and feedback. Next week we have Al Bellamy joining the show. And in the meantime, if you have not subscribed to our YouTube, feel free to do that at Ternary Data, and check out our newsletter as well at ternarydata.com. As far as the book goes, Fundamentals of Data Engineering, there should be another early release chapter coming out very, very soon. So keep an eye out for that. Scott, until next time.
Joe, Matt, thank you so much. This was fun.
Good to meet you.
All right. See you, buddy. Bye.